Is there a team that's going to cause more consternation for me in my history videos? No. Is there a team that I'm going to enjoy defending less? No. But I feel like there should be some defense. And I'm going to start with that. Now, I'm not using that as some backdoor way of talking about their defense. I'm talking about a defense of the Montreal Canadiens. This past season, they had 71 points. Absolute total unmitigated disaster from start to finish. And Marc Bergevin as GM, I'm as surprised as anybody else he's still there. But they had 103 points the year before, 82 the year before, 110 the year before, and 100 the year before, which means, much like other Canadian counterparts, they do well every odd-numbered year. Doesn't make any sense to me either. But this is a team that's capable of surprising people. And yes, they missed the playoffs, but they've made the playoffs 83 out of 101 years. That's pretty impressive. And we can talk about why they got in the playoffs so many times, but they did. Now, the interesting thing to me, because I looked this up, because I knew Claude Julien didn't last very long his first time around. He's going into his second full year, and I put a question mark because I thought, does he survive it? The reason being, he was brought in mid-season, the last time they brought him in. Made it through one season, and then he was fired halfway into the 2005-2006 season. So, is Claude Julien in for a repeat of that? And I say that because Montreal could get off to a slow start, and the pressure's going to be on Marc Bergevin to fire Julien, or on Molson to fire Bergevin, and then the new GM fires Julien. And I'm not sure how Montreal is going to have this play out. And I mean that. Now, when we get into top 5 cap hits, this is where it becomes really obvious that there are some problems. Carey Price at $10.5 million is high, admittedly. That's why I did the Carey Price video this morning, so I don't have to talk about Carey Price a whole lot in this video, because otherwise I would have, and I knew that. Shea Weber, at the amount of money he's got and the amount of term left, the problem is, of course, he's hurt, which leaves their top 4 defense strained. Shea Weber is not a Norris Trophy level defenseman anymore, but he's still pretty damn good. So when I hear people talk about how Weber sucks, I think, no, he doesn't. And again, as somebody who, I can't stand Montreal when I watch them play, and I love it when they lose, but when it's this miserable and I see everybody piling on them, I'm like, oh, the subjective side of me wants to jump on and pile on too, but the objective side of me says this can't continue because they had a 7.1% shooting percentage this past year. And I talked about that. Talked about it during the season, how abysmal their shooting percentage was, which means they're shooting from the wrong areas, and because they have guys who can score. Absolutely. Not a lot, but they have guys that can score. And even the guys who can score were having trouble with their shooting percentage. This has to go up. And yes, under Claude Julien, the Boston Bruins shooting percentage was crap as well. Bruce Cassidy takes over, and all of a sudden Boston's finding the net. I can see the correlation there. But for it to be this abysmal 2 years in a row is very unlikely. Number 3 in cap hits, Drouin and Petrie are tied. Number 4 is Alzner, and number 5 is Pacioretty, who of course is a UFA, and that will dominate our discussions from here. And now that I'm doing a preview, he'll get traded. Pacioretty is the whole fulcrum of this offense. Makes it work or not work. The plus player, I'm going to go off the chart. I'm going to say Max Domi is going to be the plus player. Why? Domi had a miserable season in Arizona. Couldn't put the puck in the ocean. Absolutely, 100%. Couldn't score a goal. Had some empty netters in there. So if you look at his goal totals, you go, wait, he got this many. Look and see how many are empty netters. And Domi didn't have a good year. He should bounce back in Montreal. And while I think Galchenyuk could be fantastic for Arizona, you can only go based on what Montreal's got. And yes, they traded away some goals, but I think they traded away a headache. I do. I think that Galchenyuk maybe was a headache. Now, maybe it's in the same vein as how Subban was rumored to be a headache, and yet when they traded him, everything got worse. But either way, he's gone. So with Galchenyuk gone, I'm going to go with Domi as the plus player. Minus player, Drouin at center. Jonathan Drouin, at this point, it looks like they're going to put him back at center. At this point, it looks like that experiment could happen again, because they don't really have a number 1 center. They may have a backup plan, which I don't like, and we'll get to that. But if they try him at center again, they're in trouble. MVP has to be Price. Carey Price is the guy that everything Montreal revolves around. And I know Habs fans hate to hear it, but as much as it was the conversation 3-4 years ago, it's even more so now that this roster relies on having excellent goaltending. It's impossible not to notice Andrew Shaw, Paul Byron, and Shea Weber will not start the season with the team. Byron projects to be back, according to what I was reading, around mid-October. And Shaw, I don't think is going to be out that long. And I know Andrew Shaw hasn't had a fantastic run with Montreal, but he's still a 10-15 goal scorer. And without him, there's a lot of what going on. Now, I'm not a fan of Shaw. I'm not a fan of Gallagher, and I've been very vocal about that. But having them on your roster, there's still more goal-scoring potential than not having them on your roster. Top 6 forwards. Pacioretty, until moved or re-signed. And then everybody loses their mind if he re-signs, and I don't know why, but people will anyways. Jonathan Drouin, Brendan Gallagher, Max Domi, Philippe Deneau, and Lehkonen. Leikkonen's a guy that I'm looking for to have, I'd say about a 20-goal season. I think he's capable of it, and I think that it would take a lot of pressure off some of the other forwards. Now, Domi shouldn't be first line, and there's been talks of them trying Domi at center, and this is where Montreal, for me, has an issue. You can't keep trying to convert people to center. It doesn't work. It didn't work with Galchenyuk. It really, to this point, hasn't worked with Drouin. And if they do decide to give Domi that shot at center, yeah, it's tricky converting wings to center. I know, and I've mentioned this before, Trevor Linden did it in his career, but he struggled at first when he moved to center. There was a lot of Canuck fans who said move him back to the wing as soon as he was struggling at center. So it can be tricky. Sometimes it does work. Maybe Drouin comes in this year and plays fantastic, and we're all forgetting all about it. If Jonathan Drouin scores 65, 70 points this year, I think that's good enough for Montreal. I think they're going to score by committee, though. The top 4 is hurting. I'm not going to lie about that. Carl Alzner, Jeff Petrie, Victor Mete, Jordy Ben, or Noah Juleson. And I'm thinking Juleson gets in there ahead of Ben. If Jordy Ben's in your top 4, that's because I'd prefer to see him a 5-6 defenseman personally. And I love Jordy Ben in Dallas, and I'd love to see him back in Dallas. But Mete, I think, is going to break through. I think Mate's got more offensive potential than what his Calder season showed. Like his rookie year didn't show, I think, that he has some more offense to him. And I think Juleson will as well. And they need it. Because Alzner's not a number 1 defenseman. He's a solid top 4 guy, and I don't think he's as buyout worthy as a lot of Montreal fans think. I know before we got into free agency, the most popular buyout. So there's a buyout calculator on Cap Friendly, and the most popular buyout was Alzner. So Montreal fans were going in and doing the math on, okay, how much money are we going to have to pay into the cap? Crap. Let's try that again. Maybe I'll get a different... Like, that's how I pictured it, as just Montreal fans just running it over and over and over again, hoping for a different result. Now, in net, of course, you have Price and Niemi. Now, if something happens with Price, Lindgren will jump in. So if Price does get hurt, Lindgren will jump in. Lindgren had decent numbers last year. But Lindgren's numbers, while they were good, they're not as good as Carey Price's when he's healthy. Now, Price had a miserable season last year. Miserable. And he'll admit it. I think that the team would admit it. And I think his blue line would take some responsibility for that in front of him. I think they would say, well, we didn't exactly help him out. But Carey Price was allowing goals that Carey Price normally doesn't. So I am betting on a bounce-back year from him. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't have a bounce-back season, just because the numbers... I can't see him being... He can't be that bad again. He can't have a 900 save percentage. He has to bounce back to at least, I would think, 910. And if you bounce back from 900 to 910 and you play 60, 65 games and give this team average goaltending, they'll be better. They'll be better. Additions, Domi. The one that gets me is Matt Pekka. So they picked up Matt Pekka as a free agent out of Tampa, And already Bergevin's like, oh yeah, he'll be on the team. Really? You're not gonna say he'll have to work for the job, or you're just gonna give him? That's the way it seemed to me. Was just yeah, he'll make it. Yeah, he's good. He only played 10 games last year for Tampa, so I'm a little bit nervous about the idea that they might be putting Pekka in the number 3 center spot. Or let's say that Drouin doesn't work out. What, does he end up being in the top 2? No, because I think there's another backup plan which makes me equally nervous. Plekanec, of course, comes back so he can play his 1,000th game as a member of the Montreal Canadiens. He's already played his 1,000th game in the NHL. I mean, his 1,000th game in a Montreal uniform. Joel Armia was stolen from Winnipeg, and I think Armia could push for here. Joel Armia is a guy who's interesting because I don't think he's ever quite lived up to his potential. I think that potential is huge. And it's become less huge as the years go by, but I still think there could be a 20-goal scorer in there. And they picked up Ouellet as well. Number 6, number 7 guy at best. He's not going to push for top 4. So playoffs, nothing in 2018 or 2016. They lost in the first round in 2017. They lost in the second round in 2015. They made it to the conference finals in 2014. So they have been going backwards. Rookies, Noah Juleson, technically still a rookie. Jesperi Kotkaniemi is very interesting. If Kotkaniemi pushes himself into a job here, and it's been said that he won't, and then it was said that they'll give him a chance. Kotkaniemi himself has said, I want to play this year. So let's just play with the idea that Kotkaniemi jumps into this spot. And Drouin struggles. So Danault goes from number 3 center to number 2. Kotkaniemi could potentially be a first-line center in the NHL this year. So if you want like a fantasy underdog, I think you could go worse than Kotkaniemi. Now what's also interesting is David Skanichka, Michael Moravchik were both signed out of the Czech League by Montreal this year. So both of these guys, who are both defensemen, are going to get a chance to push for spots. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with going in and saying, you know what, we're going to toy around here a little bit with the defense. Why don't we sign a couple guys out of Europe who might be able to play right away? I don't mind that at all. It reminds me of what Montreal or what Toronto did last year with Rosen and Borgman. And Borgman, I still think, has decent upside for Toronto. So, and Rosen, sure. So if Montreal's kind of following that template here, I don't think that's a bad way to go. Now, getting into channel voting is funny. 0%, but there were votes for first place. There were no votes for second place. Every single vote I've shown you guys where there's 0.0%, there's been a vote. There were no votes for Montreal to finish second. I had to double check the numbers. I was like, nobody voted Montreal second in the division? Nobody voted Montreal second in the division. Third, 3 out of 1,000 people are very optimistic about Montreal this year. Fourth, 1.9% of voters are from Montreal. So congratulations for sticking with your team. Because I don't know anybody outside Montreal who thinks this team's necessarily going to be fourth. But I admire that optimism. Fifth, 9.2% see them in fifth. Sixth, 19.2%. Seventh, that's where everybody's at. Montreal, 49.9%. And eighth, 18.8%. So where do I have Montreal? I have Montreal in fifth. I do not have Montreal making the playoffs. I really don't. But I think Montreal is due for a bounce-back season. It's a bounce-back season that gets them not to the playoffs, but more respectable than 71 points. That upward trajectory, unfortunately, if it happens, could save Marc Bergevin's job. If the perception is if they go from 71 points to, say, 85, which still doesn't make the playoffs, but is 14 points better, could save Bergevin's job. If Kotkaniemi comes in and plays for them this year and gets them some goals, gets them some points, looks like things are getting exciting, maybe Max Domi has a fantastic year, that could save Marc Bergevin's job. But it's going to be tricky because with injuries they've had and Carey Price always being an injury risk, there's some danger there. All right, I have exhausted all things Montreal to discuss in this video, but let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I know this is a little longer than the other previews, but again, I felt like there was a little more to it. And I think a lot of it, I think there's psychological, there's injury, and I think there's some questionable trades that have been made, but we'll see how it works out for them this year. I do not have them in the playoffs, but I do have them better than 71 points. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Done 3 Montreal videos today, and yeah. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.